Hello. So I know that no one is here at the current moment, so I guess I'll repeat it a little later. Just had my writing class, got some like okay comments. I know that there's a lot to work on, and I'm gonna have to work for a very long time to get anywhere at all, which is super exciting. Still really stressed about my housing situation. So if anybody wants to give me a two-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles for free, that would be great. But I don't think that's gonna happen. Something tells me no. Something tells me no. Um, I I've just been doing stuff. I want to make bread. I think I'm gonna make some bread after this, even though I'm supposed to be doing work. But I'll do the work too. But first, I'll make bread, and then I'll do the work. You know how that works out for me? It works out great. So yeah, that's what I've been up to today. Don't know if a ton of people are going to tune in today because 4:15 is a weird time for us. But we're starting volume 3 today. It's 100 pages that I'm going to read over 7 days, which sounds like about, oh my god. It's like 15 pages, something like that. I don't know, don't quote me. I can't do math. Um Sounds like a lot. So these chapters are probably going to be a little heftier than we're acquainted with. Okay, so what happened yesterday? Does anybody know? Anybody want to tell me? I think basically Lucy's just like, damn, the mom loves me so much. Oh, yeah. Okay, Lucy was like, damn, Mrs. Ferris just loves me. It's going to be so easy to marry Edward. Like, I'm totally cool. And then she was talking about this with Eleanor, and then Edward walks in, and this is the first time that either of them have seen him in a long time, and Edward's like, oh my god, my two women in a room together. And so it's super awkward, and Lucy, she knows that Edward and Eleanor sort of had a thing, but she also, like, ignores it and is like, that's so sweet, he's just so great, it's too bad that you can't find someone like him, and she's like, ha 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 ha. But he came in, it was weird. Marianne came in. She's got no idea about what dirt has gone down. So she's just not doing well. But she just was like, oh, Edward, you're just like the best kind of man. Like, you would never tell a lie to anyone. And Edward's like, okay. So that was good. And then the Lady Middleton, who I believe is Sir John. No, she is Sir John's wife. Mrs. Dashwood, who is John Dashwood, their brother's wife, invites Lucy and what's her face? Lucy and her sister, Miss Steele, to stay with them, but not her actual sisters. They go to a party where they meet Robert Ferris, who's just an absolute ass to everyone. And Eleanor's like, damn, I'm really glad I'm not going to be connected to this family because they're a piece of work united. And even though Edward's hot, like, is he worth it? Yeah, so in just a little bit of trivia, I've hidden the first hint for our next book in the background. It is incredibly difficult to see, and I'm sorry. I tried to make it visible, but it's there. I'll try it again. It's tough to see. But anyways, it's like, where's Waldo? Except you don't know what Waldo is or what to look for. So yeah, that's you have your hint for today worked in, and in 8 days. Sorry, I thought it was a fly. In 8 days, we'll start the next thing. And I'm going to put up my hair before we get started because I know that I'm about to get annoyed with it in about 0.5 seconds. And then we'll get going. It only takes a 0.5 seconds. You know the song from Hello Dolly, It Only Takes a Moment? It's one of my favorite musical theater songs. It's so cute and pretty. Okay, now I look different. Let's do it. Volume 3, Chapter 1 of Sense and Sensibility. Mrs. Palmer was so well at the end of a fortnight. Hello, Shiv. that her mother felt it no longer necessary to give up the whole of her time to her, and contenting herself with visiting her once or twice a day, returned from that period to her own home and her own habits, in which she found the Miss Dashwoods very ready to reassume their former share. About the third or fourth morning after their being thus resettled in Berkeley Street, Mrs. Jennings, on returning from her ordinary visit to Mrs. Palmer, entered the drawing-room, where Eleanor was sitting by herself, with an air of such hurrying importance as prepared her to hear something wonderful, and giving her time only to form that idea, began directly to justify it by saying, "Lord, my dear Mrs. is this Mrs. Jennings? It must be. Lord, my dear Miss Dashwood, have you heard the news?" "No, ma'am. What is it?" "Something so strange, but you shall hear it. When I got to Mr. Palmer's, I found Charlotte quite in a fuss about the child. She was sure it was very ill. It cried and fretted and was all over pimples. So I looked at it directly and said, 'Lord, my dear,' says I, 'it is nothing in the world but the red gum.' And the nurse said just the same. But Charlotte, she would not be satisfied. So Mr. Donovan was sent for, and luckily he happened to just be come in from Harley Street. So he stepped over directly, and as soon as ever he saw the child, he said, just as we did, that it was nothing in the world but the red gum. And then Charlotte was easy. And so, just as he was going away again, it came into my head. I am sure I do not know how it happened to think of it, but it came into my head to ask him if there was any news. So, upon that, he smirked and simpered and looked grave and seemed to know something or other, and at last he said in a whisper, 'For fear of any unpleasant report should reach the young ladies under your care as to their sister's indisposition, I think it advisable to say that I believe there is no great reason for alarm. I hope Mrs. Dashwood will do very well.'" What? I'm so confused. "What, is Fanny ill?" "That is exactly what I said, my dear. 'Lord,' says I, 'is Mrs. Dashwood ill?' So then it all came out, and the long and the short of the matter, by all I can learn, seems to be this. Mr. Edward Ferrars, the very young man I used to joke with you about, but however, as it turns out, I am monstrous glad there was never anything in it. Mr. Edward Ferrars, it seems, oh my God, has been engaged above this 12-month to my cousin Lucy. There's for you, my dear, and not a creature knowing a syllable of the matter except Nancy. Could you have believed such a thing? Possible. There is no great wonder in their liking one another, but that matters should be brought so forward between them, and nobody suspect it. That is strange. I never happened to see them together, or I am sure I should have found it out directly. Well, and so this was kept a great secret for fear of Mrs. Ferrars, and neither she nor your brother or sister suspected a word of the matter, till this very morning poor Nancy, who you know is a well-meaning creature, but no conjurer, popped it all out. 'Lord,' she thinks to herself, 'they are all so fond of Lucy, to be sure they will make no difficulty about it.' And so away she went to your sister, who was sitting all alone in her carpet work, little suspecting what was to come. For she had just been saying to your brother only 5 minutes before that she thought to make a match between Edward and some lord's daughter or other, I forget who. You may think what a blow it was to all her vanity and pride. She fell into violent hysterics immediately, with such screams as reached your brother's ears as he was sitting in his own dressing room downstairs, thinking about writing a letter to his steward in the country. So up he flew directly, and a terrible scene took place, for Lucy was come to them by that time, little dreaming what was going on. I lost my... Oh, poor soul, I pity her. And I must say, I think she was used very hardly, for your sister scolded like any fury, and soon drove her into a fainting fit. Nancy, she fell upon her knees and cried bitterly, and your brother, he walked about the room and said he did not know what to do. Mrs. Dashwood declared they should not stay a minute longer in the house, and your brother was forced to go down upon his knees, too, to persuade her to let them stay till they had packed up their clothes. Then she fell into hysterics again, and he was so frightened that he would send for Mr. Donovan, and Mr. Donovan found the house in all this uproar. The carriage was at the door ready to take my poor cousins away, and they were just stepping in as he came off. Poor Lucy in such a condition, he says, she could hardly walk. And Nancy, as she was almost as bad. I declare I have no patience with your sister, and I hope with all my heart it will be a match in spite of her. Lord, what a taking poor Mr. Edward will be in when he hears of it, to have his love used so scornfully, for they say he is monstrous fond of her as well as he may. I should not wonder if he was to be in the greatest of passion. And Mr. Donovan thinks just the same. He and I had a great deal of talk about it, and the best of all is that he has gone back again to Harley Street, that he may be within call when Mrs. Ferris is told of it, for she was sent for as soon as ever my cousin left the house, for your sister was sure she would be in hysterics too. So she may, for what I care. I have no pity for either of them. I have no notion of people's making to do about money and greatness. There is no reason on earth why Mr. Edward and Lucy should not marry, for I am sure Mrs. Ferris may afford to do very well by her son, and though Lucy has next to nothing herself, she knows better than anybody how to make the most of everything, and I dare say if Mrs. Ferris would only allow him 500 a year, she would make as good an appearance with it as anybody else would with 8. Lord, how snug they might live in such another cottage as yours, or a little bigger, with 2 maids and 2 men, and I believe I could help them to a housemaid, for my Betty has a sister out of place that would fit them exactly. Here Mrs. Jennings ceased because Eleanor passed out. Here Mrs. Jennings ceased, and as Eleanor had time enough to collect her thoughts, she was able to give such an answer and make such observations as the subject might naturally be supposed to produce. Happy to find that she was not suspected of any extraordinary interest in it, that Mrs. Jennings, as she had of late often hoped might be the case, had ceased to imagine her at all attached to Edward, and happy above all the rest in the absence of Marianne, she felt very well able to speak of the affair without embarrassment, and to give her judgment, as she believed, with impartiality on the conduct of everyone concerned in it. She could hardly determine what her own expectation of its event really was, though she earnestly tried to drive away the notion of its being possible to end otherwise at last, than in the marriage of Edward and Lucy. What Mrs. Ferris would say and do, though there could not be a doubt of its nature, she was anxious to hear, and still more anxious to know how Edward would conduct himself. For him she felt much compassion, for Lucy very little, and it cost her some pains to procure that little, for the rest of the party none at all. As Mrs. Jennings could talk on no other subject, Eleanor soon saw the necessity of preparing Marianne for its discussion. No time was to be lost in undeceiving her, in making her acquainted with the real truth, and endeavoring to bring her to hear it talked of by others, without betraying that she felt any uneasiness for her sister, or any resentment against Edward. Eleanor's office was a painful one. She was going to remove what she really believed to be her sister's chief consolation, to give such particulars of Edward as she feared would ruin him forever in her good opinion, and to make Marianne, by a resemblance in their situations which to her fancy would seem strong, feel all her own disappointment all over again. But unwelcome as such a task must be, it was necessary to be done, and Eleanor therefore hastened to perform it. She was very far from wishing to dwell on her own feelings, or to represent herself as suffering much, any otherwise than as the self-command she had practiced since her first knowledge of Edward's engagement might suggest a hint of what was practicable to Marianne. Her narration was clear and simple, and though it could not be given without emotion, it was not accompanied by violent agitation nor impetuous grief. That belonged rather to the hearer, for Marianne listened with horror and cried excessively. Eleanor was to be the comforter of others in her own distress, no less than in theirs, and all the comfort that could be given by assurance of her own composure of mind, and a very earnest vindication of Edward from every charge of imprudence, was readily offered. But Marianne for some time would give credit to neither. Edward seemed a second Willoughby, and acknowledging as Eleanor did that she had loved him most sincerely, she could feel less She could feel less than herself. And as for Lucy Steele, she considered her so totally unamiable, so absolutely incapable of attaching a sensible man, that she could not be persuaded at first to believe, and afterwards to pardon, any former affection of Edward for her. She would not even admit it to have been natural, and Eleanor left her to be convinced that it was so, by that which only could conceive her a better knowledge of mankind. Marianne's like, it's gotta be witchcraft. It's the only answer. Witchcraft is the way to go. Her first communication had reached no farther than to state the fact of the engagement, and the length of time it had existed. Marianne's feelings had then broken in and put an end to all regularity of detail, and for some time all that could be done was to soothe her distress, lessen her alarms, and combat her resentment. The first question on her side, which led to farther particulars, was, "How long has this been known to you, Eleanor? Has he written to you?" I have known it these 4 months. When Lucy first came to Barton Park last November, she told me in confidence of her engagement. At these words, Marianne's eyes expressed the astonishment which her lips could not utter. After a pause of wonder, she exclaimed, 4 months? Have you known of this 4 months? Eleanor confirmed it. What? While attending me in all my misery, has this been on your heart? And I have reproached you for being happy. It was not fit that you should then know how much I was the reverse. 4 months, cried Marianne again. So calm, so cheerful. How have you been supported? By feeling that I was doing my duty. My promise to Lucy obliged me to be secret. I owed it to her, therefore, to avoid giving any hint of the truth, and I owed it to my family and friends not to create in them a solicitude about me, which it could not be in my power to satisfy. 4 months? Sorry, that was just a non sequitur. That was not in the book. Marianne seemed much struck. I have very often wished to undeceive yourself and my mother, added Eleanor, and once or twice I have attempted it, but without betraying my trust, I could never have convinced you. 4 months? And yet you loved him. Yes, but I did not love only him, and while the comfort of others was dear to me, I was glad to spare them from knowing how much I felt. Now I can think and speak of it with little emotion. I would not have you suffer on my account, for I assure you I no longer suffer materially myself. I have many things to support me. I am not conscious of having provoked the disappointment by any imprudence of my own, and I have borne it as much as possible without spreading it farther. I acquit Edward of all essential misconduct. I wish him very happy, and I am so sure of his always doing his duty, that though now he may harbor some regret, in the end he must become so. Lucy does not want sense, and that is the foundation on which everything good may be built. And after all, Marianne, after all that is bewitching in the idea of a single and constant attachment, and all that can be said of one's happiness depending entirely on any particular person, it is not meant, it is not fit, it is not possible that it should be so. Edward will marry Lucy. He will marry a woman superior in person and understanding to half of her sex, and time and habit. Is she being sarcastic? And time and habit will teach him to forget that he ever thought another superior to her. If such is your way of thinking, said Marianne, if the loss of what is most valued is so easily to be made up by something else, your resolution, your self-command are perhaps a little less to be wondered at. They are brought more within my comprehension. I understand you. You do not suppose that I have ever felt much. For 4 months, Marianne, I have had all this hanging on my mind, without being at liberty to speak of it to a single creature, knowing that it would make you and my mother most unhappy whenever it were explained to you, yet unable to prepare you for it in the least. It was told me, it was in a manner forced on me by the very person herself, whose prior engagement ruined all my prospects, and told me, as I thought, with triumph. This person's suspicions, therefore, I have had to oppose by endeavoring to appear indifferent, where I have been most deeply interested. And it has not been only once. I have had her hopes and exultation to listen to again and again. I have known myself to be divided from Edward forever, without hearing one circumstance that could make me less desire the connection. Nothing has proved him unworthy, nor has it anything declared him indifferent to me. I have had to contend against the unkindness of his sister and the insolence of his mother, and have suffered the punishment of attachment, without enjoying its advantages. And all this has been going on at a time when, as you too well know, it has not been my only unhappiness. If you can think me capable of ever feeling, surely you may suppose that I have suffered now. The composure of mind with which I have brought myself at present to consider the matter, the consolation that I have been willing to admit, have been the effect of constant and painful exertion. They did not spring up of themselves. They did not occur to relieve my spirits at first. No, Marianne. Then, if I had not been bound to silence, perhaps nothing could have kept me entirely, not even what I owed to my dearest friends, from openly showing that I was very unhappy. Marianne was quite subdued. "Oh, Eleanor," she cried, "you have made me hate myself forever. How barbarous have I been to you! You who have been my only comfort, who have borne with me in all my misery, who have seemed to be only suffering for me. Is this my gratitude? Is this the only return I can make you? Because your merit cries out upon myself, I have been trying to do it away." The tenderest caress followed this I wanted to say confrontation. The tenderest caress followed this confession. In such a frame of mind as she was now in, Eleanor had no difficulty in obtaining from her whatever promise she required, and at her request, Marianne engaged never to speak of the affair to anyone with the least appearance of bitterness, to meet Lucy without betraying the smallest increase of dislike to her, and even to see Edward himself, if chance should bring them together, without any diminution of her usual cordiality. These were great concessions, but where Marianne felt that she had injured, no reparation could be too much for her to make. She performed her promise of being discreet to admiration. She attended to all that Mrs. Jennings had to say upon the subject with an unchanging complexion, dissented from her in nothing, and heard 3 times to say, "Yes, ma'am." She listened to her praise of Lucy with only moving from one chair to another, and when Mrs. Jennings talked of Edward's affection, it cost her only a spasm in her throat. Such advances towards heroism in her sister made Eleanor feel equal to anything herself. Affection. The next morning brought a farther trial of it, and a visit from their brother, who came with a most serious aspect to talk over the dreadful affair, and to bring them news of his wife. "You have heard, I suppose," he said with great, I don't like that voice, I'm going to change it, said he with great solemnity, as soon as he was seated, "of the very shocking discovery that took place under our roof yesterday." They all looked their assent. It seemed too awful a moment for speech. Excuse me. "Your sister," he continued, "has suffered dreadfully. Mrs. Ferris, too." Oh, God, he's going to speak for a while. "In short, it has been a scene of such complicated distress. But I will hope that the storm may be weathered without our being any of us quite overcome. Poor Fanny! She was in hysterics all yesterday. But I would not alarm you too much. Donovan says there is nothing materially to be apprehended. Her constitution is a good one, and her resolution equal to anything. She has borne it all, and with the fortitude of an angel. She says she shall never think well of anybody again, and one cannot wonder at it after being so deceived. Meeting with such ingratitude where so much kindness had been shown, so much confidence had been placed. It was quite out of the benevolence of her heart that she asked these young women to her house merely because she thought they deserved some attention. Were harmless, well-behaved girls, and would be pleasant companions, for otherwise we both wished very much to have invited you and Marianne to be with us, while your kind friend there was attending her daughter. And now to be so rewarded. I wish with all my heart, says poor Fanny in her affectionate way, that we had asked your sisters instead of them." Here he stopped to be thanked, which being done, he went on. God, oh, he and Willoughby should just go hang out together. I think Donovan might be the doctor. I think there might be the only other doctor name I can think of is Doolittle. I don't think Doolittle was a doctor. I think Donovan or Danvers or something is the doctor. Dr. Doolittle in an Austen novel. Okay, time to end it. What happened to that movie? Did it come out? I remember seeing all these ads for it. All right, this is unimportant. What poor Mrs. Ferris suffered when first Fanny broke it to her, it is not to be described. While she, with the truest affection, had been planning a most eligible connection for him, was it to be supposed that he could be all the time secretly engaged to another person? Such a suspicion could never have entered her head. If she suspected any prepossession elsewhere, it could not be in that quarter. There, said she, I might have thought myself safe. Oh, there, to be sure, said she, I might have thought myself safe. She was quite in agony. We consulted together as to what should be done, and at last she determined to send for Edward. He came. But I am sorry to relate what ensued. Ooh, I'm not. All that Mrs. Ferris could say to make him put an end to the engagement, assisted too, as you may well suppose by my arguments and Fanny's entreaties, was of no avail. Duty, affection, everything was disregarded. His mother explained to him all her liberal designs in case of his marrying Miss Morton, told him that she would settle on him the Norfolk estate, which, clear of land tax, brings in a good 1,000 a year, offered even when the matter grew desperate to make it 1,200, and in opposition to this, if he still persisted in this low connection, represented to him the certain penury that must attend the match. Dude, break up with her. It doesn't matter. Oh no. His own £2,000 she protested should be his all. She would never see him again, and so far would she be from affording him the smallest assistance, that if he were to enter into any profession with a view of better support, she would do all in her power to prevent his advancing in it. Here Marianne, in an ecstasy of indignation, clapped her hands together and cried, Gracious God! Can this be possible? Well, you may wonder, Marianne, replied her brother, at the obstinacy which could resist such arguments as these. Your exclamation is very natural. I was going into Mrs. Jennings a while in there. Saw we? Marianne was going to retort, but she remembered her promises and forbore. All this, however, he continued, was urged in vain. Edward said very little, and what he did say was in the most determined manner. Nothing should prevail on him to give up his engagement. You dumbass! He would stand to it, cost him what it might. Then, cried Mrs. Jennings with blunt sincerity, no longer able to be silent, he has acted like an honest man. I beg your pardon, Mr. Dashwood, but if he had done otherwise, I should have thought him a rascal. I have some little concern in the business as well as yourself, for Lucy Steele is my cousin, and I believe there is not a better kind of girl in the world, nor one who more deserves a good husband. Eleanor and Marianne are like... John Dashwood was greatly astonished, but his nature was calm, not open to provocation, and he never wished to offend anybody, especially anybody of good fortune. He therefore replied without any resentment. I would by no means speak disrespectfully of any relation of yours, madam. Miss Lucy Steele is, I dare say, a very deserving young woman, but in the present case, you know, the connection must be impossible. To have entered into a secret engagement with a young man under her uncle's care, the son of a woman, especially of such a very large fortune as Mrs. Ferris's, is perhaps altogether a little extraordinary. In short, I do not mean to reflect upon the behaviour of any person whom you have a regard for, Mrs. Jennings. We all wish her extremely happy, and Mrs. Ferris's conduct throughout the whole has been such as every conscientious good mother in like circumstances would adopt. It has been dignified and liberal. Edward has drawn his own lot, and I fear it will be a bad one. Marianne sighed out her similar apprehension, and Eleanor's heart wrung for the feelings of Edward, while braving his mother's threats for a woman who could not reward him. Why do you feel bad for him? He had every opportunity to break off this engagement. Edward, your sense of duty. Zunza. Well, sir, said Mrs. Jennings, and how did it end? I am sorry to say, ma'am, in a most unhappy rupture. Edward is dismissed forever from his mother's notice. He left her house yesterday, but where he is gone and whether he is still in town, I do not know, for we, of course, can make no inquiry. Poor young man! And what is to become of him? What indeed, ma'am? It is a melancholy consideration. Born to the prospect of such affluence, I cannot conceive a situation more deplorable. The interest of £2,000, how can a man live on it? And when to that is added the recollection that he might, but for his own folly, within 3 months have been in the receipt of £2,500 a year, for Miss Morton has £30,000, I cannot picture myself a more wretched condition. We must all feel for him, and the more so because it is totally out of our power to assist him. Poor young man, cried Mrs. Jennings, but I am sure he should be very welcome to bed and board at my house, and so I would tell him if I could see him. It is not fit that he should be living about his own charge now, and at lodgings and taverns. Eleanor's like, yeah, invite him here. Eleanor's heart, oh, well, no, she's actually going to be nice. Eleanor's heart thanked her for such kindness towards Edward, though she could not forbear smiling at the form of it. If he would only have done as well by himself, said John Dashwood, as all his friends were disposed to do by him, he might now have been in his proper situation, and would have wanted for nothing. But as it is, it must be out of anybody's power to assist him. And there is one thing more preparing against him, which must be worse than all. His mother has determined, with a very natural kind of spirit, to settle that estate upon Robert immediately, which might have been Edward's on proper conditions. I left her this morning with her lawyer talking over the business. Well, said Mrs. Jennings, that is her revenge. Everybody has a way of their own. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Whew. Everybody has a way of their own, but I do not think mine would be to make one son independent because another has plagued me. Marianne got up and walked about the room. Can anything be more galling to the spirit of a man? Sir John has had like 5 different voices during this reading. I'm sorry. Thanks. Can anything be more galling to the spirit of a man, continued Sir John, than to see his younger brother in possession of an estate which might have been his own? Poor Edward, I feel for him sincerely. A few minutes more, spent in the same kind of effusion, concluded his visit, and with repeated assurances to his sister that he really believed there was no material danger in Fanny's indisposition, and that they need not, therefore, be very uneasy about it, he went away, leaving the 3 ladies unanimous in their sentiments on the present occasion, as far at least as it regarded Mrs. Ferris's conduct, the Dashwoods and Edwards. Marianne's indignation burst forth as soon as he quitted the room, and as her vehemence made reverse impossible in Eleanor and unnecessary in Mrs. Jennings, they all joined in a very spirited critique upon the party. What? Edward! Ugh, you had an out. That I don't even know, man. Oh, buddy. I hope they feel bad. I hope Mrs. Ferris is like, damn, I should have been nicer to Eleanor now. But I'm sure she's not because she's a piece. I'm trying to decide if I should read the next chapter. I shouldn't. This is already 35 minutes long, and this is only 1 page less. So I'm going to break faith and not read the next chapter. I think that's what's going to have to happen. Okay, I said 30 minutes a day, and that's what I'm trying to do. Somebody's writing a letter in the next chapter. I don't know. Ooh, Whoa, it's going to be exciting. I'm going to segment. All right. Just one chapter today for the sake of my poor voice. All right. Tomorrow is Thursday. Okay, that means I'm in at 1. So I will see you guys and gals and non-binary pals at 1. And I wish to you all a great rest of your day. I'm going to go bake some bread because I'm hungry for bread and we don't have any good bread. So I'm going to make it myself. Yee. Everyone is welcome here all the time, except for people who tell me to show them my boobs. They are not welcome here. That's my little song about people. Okie dokie. I will see y'all tomorrow. I'm so hungry for bread. All right. I'm going to go make some. Have a good rest of your day. I think my elementary school used to say this over the loudspeaker. Make it a great day or not. The choice is yours. And, I agree with that to some point, but also it's coronavirus. Okay. See you tomorrow at 1. Yes. I feel like I've been knew that we went to the same elementary school, but it just did we? Should confirm in the chat. Because you live in the right spot. I don't know where else you would have gone to elementary school, right? Okay. Because I was like, this can't possibly have been my first interaction with Shiv. Not this, obviously, high school. Okay, I'm gonna go because I keep talking and I should stop talking. Anyways, I feel bad because the hint for the next book is in this corner right there. Can you see it? I'll outline it for you. I'll just say it's an X-wing. That's your hint. It's an X-wing. Okay. I will see you soon. All right, I'm going for real. I'm really going. I'm going right now. I'm hitting end. Goodbye. I'm leaving. Au revoir.